I am back in my little sewing studio and I am working on a few different projects. The space isn't super sophisticated, but it's very functional. I added this ironing board last week from Walmart, which has been a huge help. And then I have my hand-me-down sewing machine, a little cutting mat, and then all of my thread and supplies. You can probably tell that I am making a baby bib. I purchased some plans on Etsy for a variety of different baby items, and I am making them as gifts. I have a friend's baby shower in a couple of weeks, and she's the type of friend who really appreciates a handmade gift, so I wanted to make sure that I could make something special for her. Most of the fabric that I have on hand is remnants or just smaller pieces of fabric in general, and I had found this cute little dinosaur print at Joann. It was a remnant. I think I got it for like 50 cents. I bought it a couple months ago, and I figured this would be a great one to make into a bib. My friend is expecting a girl though, so I really do want to make her something a little bit more feminine and girly, but I figured starting with this fabric that I already have on hand would be a great start where I can practice the pattern, and then eventually I'm sure one of our friends will have a boy and this would be a perfect gift for them. The other reason why I didn't really want to use this fabric specifically is because the remnant width was not very wide, and for the pattern set that I got, one of the things is a burp cloth. And in order to make the burp cloth, it would make the dinosaurs go this way over your shoulder. And I really didn't love that. I wanted it to be where, you know, the dinosaurs stay horizontal. So I think what I'm gonna do with this fabric is just make a bunch of different bibs. And like I said, as our friends are expecting, this would just be a quick little gift that I could send them in the mail as like a congratulations for expecting, or maybe give it to them at a baby shower. The plans for this bib are pretty simple. I already cut out my front piece and my back piece. I'm going to be adding some interfacing on the back side of one of these pieces to just add some structure where the connection point is. The plans call to use a snap, so I would sew a snap on this side and then on this side, and you would snap it behind the baby's neck. But I figured using Velcro would be a little bit easier for mom and dad. My plan is to actually sew on that Velcro before I sew my two pieces together. So I'm not gonna be able to get very far on this project today, but I figured just cutting out the template, having everything ready, getting my interfacing on the back will give me a head start so that whenever that Velcro does arrive, I can quickly add that and then finish sewing everything, and I have a finished project. I'm very new to sewing, but I have quickly fallen in love with it. I've only been sewing for like 2 to 3 months, and most of the projects I've done so far are very small. The hardest part about sewing as a beginner is just learning all of the terminology and like all of the different stitches and ways to achieve the finish that you want. There are many ways to achieve the same thing. One of the things I just mentioned is interfacing. I didn't know what this was until I started working on some projects. It's basically a polyester material that has a resin on the back, but it is a little bit more rigid than your typical material. And the idea is that you iron on this interfacing onto whatever fabric you want to stiffen a little bit, and then that gives your project a little bit more structure. So in this case, I'm only going to be using like 2 little squares in the top portion of my bib, but on previous projects I used it to like stiffen up the ears of a bunny I made, things like that. I've seen interfacing used in like clothing and also bags, all sorts of things. But yeah, that's the basics of what interfacing is from my understanding. Instead of using just a square, I'm actually going to use the pattern to trace this curved edge and then kind of cut it off here. That way I have enough area in the case that I end up using more Velcro. I'll just have a little bit more structure. The one thing I am gonna do though is go ahead and account for the 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm not gonna make my interfacing as big as the piece you see here. I'm gonna make it a 1/4 inch smaller all around, just so I don't waste the interfacing, and then also it'll be easier for my machine to just sew through the 2 pieces of cotton material. I have friends in all stages of life, but more recently friends have started announcing pregnancies. And as a female in my early 30s, I haven't felt pressured to start thinking about pregnancy until recently. No one has ever said anything to me, but it's almost a societal pressure that I've been feeling. With social media, it's easy for me to get caught up in feeling like we're behind on starting a family when I see photos of pregnancy announcements or newborns. I try not to let those thoughts creep in too much, but it can be hard sometimes. I often find myself going through phases. One moment I feel ready, and the next I feel like I'll never be ready. It's important to remember everyone's journey in life looks different, and that the right timing for someone else might not make sense for you. Fast forward a few days and I've made a little bit of progress, but not a ton. I went ahead and sewed the bib that I had already started, and I put a poll on Instagram to poll parents to see whether they like snaps or Velcro better. And it was pretty much a 50-50 tie, but it seemed like most people really did prefer snaps. So I kind of changed my plans and decided that I was going to use snaps instead. So I needed to order some more materials, and then I went ahead and finished out the bib because the snap gets applied after the bib is finished. Also, since we last talked, I found out that one of my best friends is expecting again. So good thing I already have plans to make bibs because she's gonna get one too. And her and I talked a lot about her preferences around fabric types for bibs. And she said she really likes this like gauze type fabric. So I went to Joann's and I found a really pretty white fabric with greenery on it. And then I'm gonna pair just a green fabric with that. And then I also found a beautiful pink fabric that gives me that feminine touch that I wanted for another friend. And then it has cute little daisies on it. So on this one, I'm actually gonna be using like a little flannel on the back. I really think it's gonna look cute with mixing the stripes with the daisy pattern. I definitely do not need all of this fabric for my immediate project use, but I figured it's great to have on hand for any future friends or family who get pregnant. I can just whip something up real quick and send it off to them in the mail. When I did the poll on Instagram to see how parents like to fasten the bibs, I didn't specify the type of snap, so I went ahead and purchased some of these plastic snaps, and then I also purchased some of these metal ones. So if you're a parent and you have a preference, let me know in the comments because I did not ask that question, and I am going to start with the plastic snaps, and then maybe on some of the future ones, I will use the metal ones. I also didn't realize that I was gonna need a tool to attach the snaps. Ordered that last night. It should be here today, thanks to Amazon at some point, probably in the next hour or so. And I believe the tool I purchased is only for the plastic snaps. I think I need a separate tool for these metal ones. So hopefully I like the plastic ones so that I don't have to get a second tool, but we'll see. The plan set I purchased also included instructions to make pacifier clips. So I ordered a big bag of these. I went with these plastic ones, and then I also ordered some elastic for the other end. Right now, I'm just kind of mocking up how I plan to sew this. I'm actually going to use a different method than what's recommended in the instructions. I made this wrist lanyard over the past month, and this kind of gave me some ideas on how to do this pacifier clip a little bit cleaner, just like making sure that it's symmetrical on both sides, that kind of thing. So I am going to change the plans on that based on what I learned from doing this small project. That's the benefit of doing like small projects here and there and trying different patterns, because you can learn different methods to do the same thing. I already cut out my fabric for my burp cloth and also my next bib that I'm gonna make. This one is a handkerchief pattern, so you can see it's slightly different shaped than the other one. The thread I'm using is thread that was given to me from my grandmother. It came along with all of her other sewing supplies. So I think this matches pretty close. It's a little bit brighter than the fabric itself, but I think it'll work okay. As far as sewing something like this goes, this is a really simple and easy project. So what I'm gonna do is turn the right sides together like I have here with the burp cloth, so you can see my two nice sides are together. And then I'm going to sew with a 1/4 inch all around the edge, leaving a tiny opening right here where it's straight so that I can turn it inside out. And then the last thing that I will do is run a top stitch around the edge to give it a nice finish. Now, this top stitch on this one here was a little bit wonky here at first, but once I got the hang of it, it ended up turning out okay, and I don't really think anyone's gonna notice my tiny little mess up. I'm not exactly sure what happened here, but for some reason, the one side is a lot longer than the other side. I have found that in my little time sewing, one of the hardest things to do is to cut out the pattern accurately. So if you have any tips on cutting things out accurately, let me know. I find that it's especially hard whenever the pattern tells you to fold and then cut on the fold. So I don't know if it's just how I'm folding it or if things aren't laying perfectly flat, but for this instance, I'm actually just gonna cut off this extra fabric so that I don't get confused as I'm sewing. Before sewing a couple months ago, I had never threaded a machine before, and the first time I did it, it probably took me close to 30 minutes, not even an exaggeration. The machine itself came with an instruction manual, and this is what I used to actually thread the machine. The instructions are pretty basic, and some of the diagrams were really hard for me to follow. So I did have to supplement with a YouTube video, just like a random YouTube video I found on this specific machine. But if you are new to sewing, rest assured, it does get easier. And I find that the more frequently that you change out the thread and the more frequently that you thread new bobbins, it's gonna become that much easier. It's just like anything else. Once you practice the skill, it becomes a lot easier. If you came to this video for some lighthearted entertainment or maybe to learn a thing or two about sewing, I apologize for bringing some heavy feelings. My favorite YouTubers are creators who are authentically them, and that sometimes means sharing some of those bigger feelings. I'm trying to bring more of that to this channel, and I find that it's taking a lot of practice and it's a lot harder than I originally thought it would be. As soon as I turn on the camera, I have a hard time being fully myself. I know that sounds really silly, but for some reason I go into full presentation mode. I think that might be partially because when I was in college, I tutored, and so I kind of have a tendency to go back to those roots. But regardless, I've been longing for connection for months, and I feel that some of the shorter form platforms like Instagram or Facebook just really are missing that deeper connection with people because the content is so short. So I'm hoping to bring more of how I'm feeling and being more open here on YouTube. I'm starting my stitch on this straight edge here so that by the time I get around the whole bib, then this is the portion that I'll leave open so that I can easily turn it inside out. It turned out pretty good. The part that I have the most trouble with are the straps because you are going around a curve, and I have trouble just keeping that seam allowance even. This is the first side here, but I did get better with the second side. The seam allowance did get a little bit bigger around the curve, but at least you have like a nice smooth curve here rather than here where it's like kind of jagged. I probably could rip out these stitches, but to me that seems like a lot more work than what it's worth. And I think that once I turn it inside out and then I top stitch, you won't really be able to see anything. What I might actually do is just kind of run a quick stitch across here to just connect these two lines so that it's not such a stark little jut out there. So I think I'm gonna do that first. So getting back to that deeper subject of starting a family, one of my friends who's currently pregnant loves learning and planning similar to Alex and I. So I reached out to her in the fall to see if I could sit down with her and just pick her brain about some of the things that she's learned about pregnancy. There's so much information online that it can be really overwhelming. So it was really helpful to sit down with her and learn from her, and then also start reading a few of the books that she had recommended. I'll link those below in case you're in a similar place in life. One of the things that we discussed is water bath births. I know that a lot of women in the homesteading community choose to have water bath births, and that's definitely something that we are considering, but that is something that can be decided on later on. So right now, I've really been focused on learning more about the menstrual cycle and fertility. I also have been focused on taking better care of my own personal health with working out regularly and eating whole foods, and also just eliminating a lot of the toxins that we subject ourselves to. Even with just the little bit of reading that I've done so far, it is crazy to me how little I knew about my own body before reading some of these books. I'm sure I learned some of these things when I was in high school, but I feel like I'm learning all of this for the first time, and I am so glad that I decided to pick up some books before this whole process started. The one book that I think is really helpful whether or not you are thinking about starting a family sometime soon is the book titled Taking Charge of Your Fertility. It teaches you a lot about the menstrual cycle in general, and for me this has been really eye-opening. I know a lot of women who do cycle syncing, so basically they track their cycle and they know when their hormones are at certain levels from like a very general standpoint, but that allows them to kind of change their lifestyle accordingly. And for me, knowing that, now I can give myself grace during certain times of the month because I can attribute some of those things to the stage of the cycle I'm in. Here is the finished bib. It turned out so incredibly cute. We have the daisies on one side, and then we also have stripes on the other side. I added 2 snaps on it so that it would be adjustable. It actually is also reversible. I didn't intend for that to be the case, but it is, and I guess that's part of the pattern. And for the bib, I decided not to do a top stitch. I thought it looked cute without it, so I just left it as is. The burp cloth turned out super cute as well. So we have daisies on the one side, stripe on the other. And then for the burp cloth, I did go ahead and do a top stitch. I'll link the Etsy pattern that I used below so that you can access it. For the burp cloth, they had multiple designs, so if you don't want it to have the concave, you can also do more of a rectangle shape. I think this one works pretty well. We weren't sure because we don't have kids, but this is what we went with. I also have been experimenting with some of my scrap, making cute little hearts. I thought it would be fun to make a garland out of the scraps and make like heart garland and then wrap the gift in that. So I'm gonna keep experimenting with that and see what I come up with. I've also went ahead and started my next set of bibs and burp cloths. This time I'm using this white fabric and green fabric. I'm getting a little bit smarter and I'm cutting out a bunch of fabric all at once, and then I'll sew it all at once. It's a little bit challenging to get the pattern to lay exactly how I want and also optimize the amount of fabric I'm using. So that's something that I have to improve upon with my process. Alex suggested maybe using SketchUp or Canva or something else where I could lay out how I'm gonna cut everything digitally first and then kind of transfer that into real life where then I can optimize the fabric usage. If you're looking for an easy homemade gift for someone who's expecting in your life, this is a really good gift idea. It's so easy and it's almost therapeutic because it is just somewhat mindless once you get into it. So if you're looking for an idea, definitely check out making bibs or burp cloths. I haven't started on the pacifier clips yet. That's gonna be a future project for me, and I probably won't film that. I'll leave a link to the Etsy listing below. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you next time.